So when they had come together, they asked him, "Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel?" He said to them, "It's not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the end of the earth." When he had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while they were gazing into heaven as he went, behold, two men stood by them in white robes and said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven." Let's pray. Father, thank you just for these pictures and these instructions and stories. Thank you for your word that we have, Lord, that we can learn from it, that we could see your heart behind it, that we can have truth in it. As we talk about mission and what it means to be on mission and what Meadowview's view of mission is, Lord, would you just be with us? Help us to have sanctified imagination on how to best partner with you, how to best be used by you in your great commission, Lord, to take the gospel to the nations, but not only to the nations, Lord, but to our Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth, Lord. So Lexington, North Carolina, United States, and the ends of the earth. Would you be with us now? In Christ's name, amen. So the Great Commission, we usually either read it from Matthew 28, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them everything that I have instructed you. And behold, I'm with you till the end of the age." Matthew 28. And this verse is from Acts chapter 1, particularly, "You will be my witnesses." Well, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the end of the earth. And that's very intentional, because that's the actually outline of the book of Acts. You see the gospel spread from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria and to the end of the earth as Paul goes to Rome. And then, the Roman Empire and their reach across the earth. And that also forms the pattern and the paradigm for mission in the local church. And so you've heard this said before, and even in my prayer, like, what is our Jerusalem? That's where they were. What's our Jerusalem? Well, it's Lexington. It's Davidson County. It's Piedmont Triad. It's this area. Judea may be considered perhaps North Carolina. And then beyond that, South Carolina, Georgia, United States, and then the ends of the earth globally. And so mission starts at home, and it goes out from there. And Jesus came, and you heard in the verses that we read, he's coming back. When's he coming back? Well, we'd all like to know that. Does anybody know when he's coming back? Good answer, or non-answer. Be wary whenever you hear somebody say they know when he's coming back. Jesus says, I don't even know. In his humanity, while on earth, the disciples kept asking him this question. And he said, that's for the Father to know. Now, Christ, who has all knowledge, I'm sure he knows as he's with the Father. Okay, so what's the point of this? I've already led into some of that. I want to explain there's been a number of changes in missions and our vision for missions here at Meadowview, and it has not been communicated. And so that's what I'm trying to do now, and we're filming it. And so let's go on. So I says, first thing is missions is not an option. And one thing that I appreciate about Meadowview is you all are very dedicated and committed to missions. You give almost $100,000 a year specifically to fund missions work outside of Meadowview. But I want to be careful to say everything Meadowview does should be about missions. I hope you view my role here as a pastor, and when you give money to, and people like myself and Pablo get paychecks, and Taylor, and all the staff, Mark, that's mission, because mission is the spread of the gospel. And every week as we do ordinary means of grace ministry, as we preach the word and do sacraments, and we seek to live out our faith in the community, that's mission. But the $100,000 that you give to Faith Promise which I'll explain in a minute or so, that goes to fund missions outside of Meadowview. And that's a lot of money for a church our size and for our overall budget. Our overall budget is not quite $800,000, and y'all are giving $100 extra on top of that. That's significant. Okay, so we did the Matthew 28 verse. That's the theme verse for the missions conference. And Dr. O. Palmer Robertson gave us wonderful talks on that. Another reason we do missions, I love this Matthew 5 verse. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. We're not to hide the gospel under a bushel, right? You don't take a lamp and put it under a basket. We shine the light. And so that's the only reason we exist. It's the only reason we exist. Everything we can have and enjoy in this life, God gives us. He wants us to enjoy it. He doesn't begrudge us things like family and careers and jobs and enjoying life. But if not lived to the glory of God, it's meaningless. We are here to spread the gospel. So to define some of our terms, because I'm going to use them, and sometimes people use them different ways, but when I say faith promise, that's our mission budget of money that goes to fund missions work outside of Meadowview, but it could be locally, but we're funding missionaries. It's about $95,000 this year. In the past, it's been as much, I think, as $105,000. And this money has to be designated by you, the giver, to say, if you put missions or faith promise, we know that that's where it's going to. It's going to help pay Jeremy Sink. It's going to help pay Pastor Yin in Greensboro. It's going to help. That's where that money goes. Right now, incidentally, we don't quite have $30,000 of the almost $100,000 committed for this year. And so that's just for us to be aware of. Yeah, I was wondering why this thing was pulling on me. Okay, that money and those missionaries are supported by what has been called here a missions team. Okay, so when we said the missions team would evaluate missionary applications and make recommendations to the session about whether or not we could fund them. And the missions team would keep up with the missionaries. And that's why so many in our congregation have such great relationships with all those missionaries that we had here 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. Because they're writing letters to them, they're receiving updates for them, they're making sure we know what's going on with them. And I think, and this I'll take on myself and as a pastoral staff, we can do a better job pastorally of getting that information out there through testimonies during worship services, through email announcements, and other ways. But there's also another group of money and funds that we use for local outreach, local mercy, and it's almost $50,000, and that comes from the general fund or the operating budget. So the way the church accounting works is there's money that you give, you call it tithes, offerings, donations, whatever you consider the money you give for the operation of the church, that goes to the general fund or the operating budget. And whatever you give to Faith Promise goes to fund missionaries directly. So we still, out of your tithes and offerings, give about $50,000 to local mercy, local mission, and local outreach. Actually, it's actually more than that because we give money through that also to the General Assembly and to our presbytery missions agencies. So that's probably closer to like $80,000. I should have really updated that because I didn't include the denominational stuff. But there's Faith Promise that goes to fund missionaries, and then there's local things, local outreaches, local mercy that we fund out of the general fund. So things like Pastor's Pantry, the food pantry, things like Greater Things Outreach Center, the food pantry, things like the crisis, Davidson County Crisis Shelter. We fund those things. And I'll show you that. Why did I allude to some of the confusion before? Okay, so I think this slide is too, yeah. Let's look at this first. The missions team, so we're not right now exactly talking about the outreach or the mercy side of things. We're talking about the missions team, the faith promise stuff. John Frank faithfully led this for, we don't have the exact years, but over a dozen years. And that guy's organized, he's got his finger on the pulse, and he did an awesome job for us. During that time, because of John's connections in the community, and because of his relationships with like the hospital and Davidson County Medical Ministries and all these things, Chris was the senior pastor. He took that category of local missions, local outreach and mercy and included it under the purview of the missions team. It usually was managed by the session, but Chris felt it was better overseen by the missions team because of John Frank's work and connections to all these ministries. Then at some point around 2018, 2019, Dan Entwistle, because John wanted out, we didn't want him to leave, but he needed a break. And so Dan Entwistle took over the missions chairing, the missions team, who decides who gets the money and all of that. Around the same time, I was hired as executive pastor. Now, if you remember the history of why I was hired as executive pastor is because administratively here, there was determined to be a lot of need around helping ministries and helping Chris and helping the session and the diaconate stay organized, because administratively things have gotten complicated in ministry over the years. And also, it's not a surprise that wasn't a strong suit of Chris. He was very open about that in the congregation, and so he wanted a pastor to come alongside but be an executive pastor and oversee these things. As soon as I got here in 2019, a number of people from the missions committee were coming to me and asking for session direction for their team, for the missions team. John Frank was one of them. Another was Dan Entwistle. Another was Aubrey Moore, who Aubrey has been instrumental in our missions team. And they had said, we have been asking the session for a number of years for direction, and we need some direction. And Chris told them, wait till we get our executive pastor. So I get there, and now I'm supposed to help solve whatever confusion or problems there were. Dan Entwistle left at the end of 2021, and Aubrey Moore took over as the interim chair. So now we'll go back to this, the confusion. What was why are they asking for session direction? The team felt that there was a lack of vision and direction coming from the session. A lot of information wasn't flowing very well between the session and the missions team. And I'm not saying that to offend us on the session, because I'm on the session now, or the missions team. But there seemed to be a disconnect often, and the team often felt like they didn't have the best sort of direction. There also seemed to be confusion among where faith promise money could go. And so I'll give you an example. There was a need to build of a family. I don't remember if they were a missionary family or not, but they were adopting special needs kids, I think, out of Russia. And there were some on the mission team that thought, this is missions and we're going to build them an addition on their house. And the diaconate came along and said, wait a minute, our own members need repairs on their homes. That's not why people are giving to Faith Promise to go build additions on people's homes. That doesn't fit within the parameters. And so there was confusion. Where can money go? Where does it go? Again, there was a good heart behind that. I'm probably going to say things today that like maybe ruffle some feathers, but my point is not to do that. My point is simply to say these are some of the confusions that were happening. The money did not go to do that, and some people felt like it should have gone to help do that. And others said our policies don't allow that. And so there needed to be clarity over that. There were discussions of conflict of interest among the team that was causing debate. And I don't think I need to get into the details on that, but some members on the team were coming to the session and saying, there's this missionary and there's a conflict of interest on the team, and how do we deal with it? Not that anything was being done improperly, but how do we deal with it? Mercy and outreach were dumped on the missions team. And again, I kind of explained that because of John Frank's expertise. Everything and he's so good with budgets, everything got put there. But what that did is it took it out of the session's hands to be able to direct what strategic partnerships we have in the community. So rather than the session driving that based on the session's vision, another group was deciding that. And there was plenty of miscommunication and failed communication. And I saw that firsthand between pastors. I don't know if it was between the session, but between pastors and between the team. On top of it, what we found is there was actually some slight tweaks needed in our model. And that's where we're going to spend some time until we go, and then I'll get to what changes we made. So we talk about the transitions. Okay, so because I was hearing this for like 6 or 7 months or a year, we need direction, we decided to form a missions revitalization team on the session. So this missions revitalization team was going to do 2 main things: evaluate our current missions status and policies, and develop a vision, policies, and direction for the future. Evaluate where we are, determine where we should go. You get it? Okay. So who was on the team was Ozzie Marin, a ruling elder, who happened to be on the missions team. Danny Snyder, a ruling elder, who happened to be on the missions team. John Hargett and Pablo. And then I was there for the first 8 out of 30 meetings to help guide and direct what needed to get done. And then I was able to step away and the team did it. Now you may say, well, why weren't members of the church or other members of the missions team on it? We asked many of them. We asked John Frank, he didn't want to be on it. We asked Dan Entwistle, he didn't want to be on it. We asked Aubrey Moore, and she didn't want to be on it. And all of them said they trust the session. And part of the problem is administratively, they were all so busy, they didn't want more work. And like I said, this group met probably 30 times. So the group would then consult with them. I mean, John Frank was a part of a number of discussions, but he didn't want to be officially a part of the thing. Okay, yeah, we said that. All right, so some of what we uncovered as we evaluated where we are is that Meadowview, like a lot of churches, we're still operating off of a mid-20th century missions model. What do I mean? What do you think I mean by that? Oh, that's good. Of course, you've been on the missions team, so you know some of it. Right? And so you start supporting a missionary 1 year, and then they're there for 30 years, and you don't have extra money to give to others. So that's one, and there's a reason for that. What else? 50 years ago, how did we view America religiously? Christian. Do we view America that way anymore? No. So 50 years ago, missions was, we're Christian, everybody in our community is Christian, so we have to do mercy work here, help feed the poor, but mission is out there, and so we're going to send money out there, you see? And there's other things. The United States is a Christian nation and very wealthy, and so we're going to send money and missionaries overseas. And missions is mostly pre-evangelism. What do I mean by that? When missionaries would go overseas 50 years ago, what do I mean by pre-evangelism? They're just going to share the gospel to a people that have no infrastructure to have churches, right? You're not going to go there and make a church plant when there's no Christians to be in the church plant. And so you have people going over there through tent making and parachurch ministries and all kinds of creative ways, medical ministries, or just Christians trying to live among and bring Christianity in, okay? Long-term relationships are developed with those missionaries because those missionaries have to leave here and go there forever until the gospel gets enough traction where churches can form. And what do you need when you have a church? If you're going to start a church, what do you need? Well, a place to meet, but they can meet, they would meet by the riverbanks, they'd meet in people's houses, they'd meet wherever. Well, you need the people, so you need Christians. Who said it? Pastor. You need elders, don't you? You need elders. How do you get elders if you don't have mature, discipled Christians, right? And so it takes a lot of time. And so the missionaries needed indefinite commitments. It's not like they're going to go there, do a work, and leave. They're going to be there, and they need funding continuously. Also, when churches were formed, because the locals didn't have often, again, the discipleship or the resources, it was like we were putting American churches in these countries. And they were run by Americans, and they were, and other missionaries were the staff, right? Okay, so basically we're exporting Western civilization as Christianity. And by the way, I don't have any problem with how we did most of that. We needed to do something, right? So we assume the people in the U.S. are Christian, and so local work then isn't missions. And I've seen a lot of this mindset. Believe me, I saw it in South Florida, I see it here, where if you're doing it locally, it's not missions, because missions happens out there, see? So the local dollars are spent on mercy endeavors and not mission, so feeding the hungry and clothing people in the prison system and these kinds of things. But not much money or effort or energy is put toward things like evangelism, church planting, conversion, because everybody was Christian. So missions is viewed as international, and mercy ministry is viewed as what we do locally. Do you get what I'm saying? This is what it was, okay? And much of what we were doing and embodied this. And all churches are experiencing this, because we're going to see how rapidly we've become anti-Christian in America. Nobody was prepared for this. Okay, but America has changed. We've been called a post-Christian nation, and I love this kind of analysis. I'll show you where it comes from. That the culture in America, our attitude toward Christianity before 1994 was positive. Christianity was viewed as mostly positive, as a positive force in the world. Not that everybody in the country was Christian, but that's how it was viewed. Between 94 and 2014, it was kind of neutral. The culture, people in the culture kind of put up with us. Now, 2014 and on, it's negative. And that's just accelerated through the Obergefell marriage decision. And so this comes from a journal article in First Things by a scholar and theologian, Aaron Wrenn. He says, the positive world, society at large, retains a mostly positive view of Christianity. To be known as good, church-going man remains part of being an upstanding citizen. I remember a guy, he was starting a business in the 80s, and I met him in the early 2000s, but he would tell me what his dad told him. Well, if you're going to start this security business, you need to go join a church, because the guy wasn't going to church. And so this guy, he goes, go to pick this church or this church, because people need to know you're a Christian. And that was in the 80s. Christian moral norms are the basic moral norms of society, and violating them can bring negative consequences. In the neutral world, society takes a neutral stance towards Christianity. It no longer has privileged status, but it's also not disfavored. Being publicly known as a Christian isn't either positive or negative. Christianity is an option with pluralistic public square. Christian moral norms have some residual effect. But in the negative world, in the last 10 years, society has come to have a negative view of Christianity. Being known as a Christian is a social negative, particularly in the elite domains of society. So you think of the cities. Christian morality is expressly repudiated and seen as a threat to the public good and the new public moral order. Subscribing to Christian moral views or violating the secular moral order brings negative consequences. Do you agree with that? Okay. We can debate about when those divisions are, but I think we know we're there. Okay. Now, what I love about, because I experienced this in South Florida, what I love about being in this part of North Carolina is I tell people I'm a pastor, I'm a Christian, and that's still a valued thing. But that's changing in the cities, and that's changing in a lot of places in the country, and we get that. But how does this then impact how we view missions? The missions could be next door to the church, right? Like Pablo's neighbor, who sees his conservative social media posts and she's not happy about him. Oh, you're one of those pastors. Yeah, missions is our neighbors. But oftentimes, like when we would be talking to the missions team about, maybe funding a church plant in High Point or funding Pastor Yin or, oh, well, that's local. That should be in the mercy category. No, it's missions. That's what we got to do. We got to get the mindset around the fact that if we go out and do evangelism, if we go out and do prayer walks, that's missions, So, and that's why I love what the Vissers have done with Got a Mission, and I want to expand that. I want to do more with that. All right, so this is how severe it is. The rise of the religious nuns. So the nuns they check the box, no religious affiliation. So that's 1972 on the left and 2021, I think, all the way on the right. And in 72, 90% of the country claimed to be Christian. Now, if you were to dig into those statistics, it wouldn't be 90%, because they often say, well, how often do you go to church, and are you read in the Word, and then you suddenly get lower. But 90% would say, I am a Christian. And look at how long that lasted. For 20 more years. It's basically flat up there on the left, right? It actually has a spike in 1992. But then it goes from 90% to 80% in 97. I don't think we realize that. We just think, oh, that's 10%. That is a huge worldview change in a short period of time. And then it goes down to 63%. Now, do you know what the estimates of that 63% are of people who are actually Christians? What'd you say? He says half. What do you think? That's right. Half of the 63%, about 30%. Because you know that there's a lot of liberal Christian denominations, liberal theologically, that those people going to those churches, they don't believe the Bible's the Word of God. They don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. They don't believe in any of a biblical worldview, and they call themselves Christians, right? They're in the 63% number. So really, that's half. Yeah, I would say it does. Because this is Pew Research, and Catholics would check the box of Christian. And so, yeah, it includes the Catholics. And then this is the last 20 years. So actually, practicing Christian is 25%. You see, in the year 2000, the top line and the red line, the year 2000, 45%, and this is by Barna, were practicing Christians. So even though maybe at that point, I think the other side said 80% would say they're Christian, only 45% were practicing Christians. Now, how do you rate that? Well, again, they ask, like, how often do you read the Bible? How often do you go to church? These are not hard and fast rules, but they do it like that. But that's gone down to 25% in 2020. 25%. That means 3 out of 4 people in our country don't know Jesus. And 1 out of 4 might know him. Okay, so the problem with this model of viewing missions as something overseas and out there, and mercy is all we do locally, is a couple things. One, we have shrinking budgets. We have shrinking budgets. Like I already said, I think our missions budget has decreased by 10% in the short time that I've been here. And honestly, our church membership has decreased. You know that, I think. So, and legacy commitments. Somebody we've supported, or maybe all of the missionaries we've supported for 10, 20, 30 years. So what happens if you're supporting the same people and you never remove them and you have less money? Can you ever add it? I mean, you don't need a math degree, right? Right, Eddie? Right. Okay. So you're basically locked into who you're supporting, right? Now, if you're supporting the same people for a number of years, again, 10, 20 years, you're operating off of the church's vision from 20 years ago. Now, what if the Lord is doing a new work? How do you fund it? What if the Lord is directing the session to do something new? What if we're trying to plant a church somewhere locally, but we don't have any money to give because we're operating off of the mindset. Now, nothing what I'm saying means that we need to be cutting missionaries, that what they're doing is not good work. But I'm just saying we need to come to grips with this. The budget is going down, and we have indefinite commitments with our missionaries. So how will we ever support? And by the way, every year we're getting new missions requests for money. How do we ever support a new one? We've lost the U.S., meaning in Christianity, but our focus right now, 2-3 years ago, was highly focused on international missions. So we lose our backyard, and we're trying to reach people far away. The majority of money gets committed before the year starts, leaving little flexibility in the year. And so what I mean by that is we budget everything now for next year. Now March comes and a request comes up, and we need, and it's a good request that the session says, yes, we should partner with that. You need to wait till next year. Okay? And that's just because money's short, Future years are captive to prior years' visions, and I've already explained that. Makes it difficult to ever add new missionaries. Many missionaries, this was one we encountered. Many of the missionaries, because we were supporting them for a long time, were no longer doing what they applied to us and we started supporting them to do. Doesn't mean we don't love them, but it should mean we should be able to then make valuable or decisions based on, is this where the Lord is asking us to spend our money? Or another problem is a number of times, and I experienced this at the church in South Florida, you support a missionary for 10 or 20 years and then they retire, but they can't really afford to retire. But they have to because they're older. Do you keep supporting them? You feel guilty not to, but if you're supporting a bunch of retired missionaries and your budget's not increasing, how do you keep doing missions? And so we need to do this compassionately, but we need to recognize that we can't be the missionaries' retirement accounts. Unless we got some millionaires in here and you want to do that. And then local peoples, meaning the people in our church, are not empowered to do mission. You see, in the 19-whatever years, in the middle of last century, if you think everybody in your community is a Christian, you think doing missions is writing a check. And then you just love your neighbor. But nobody's actually empowered to spread the gospel because you think everybody's a Christian. But we know now not everybody's a Christian. Are we empowering our people to do missions, to do evangelism? One of the main complaints I've received at my old church, I haven't gotten it so much here, but I think it would be the same. It's just because we were teaching classes where this was coming up. But people did not feel equipped to share their faith, to evangelize, to do apologetics. Now that even though we had just taught an apologetics class, an evangelism class, and a reaching the culture class. So 1 year full of classes, and at the end it says, we don't know how to do this. At some point you just got to go out and do it. And sustainability is not considered. So when you start supporting a missionary, are they going to ever be sustainable on their own or not? Okay. So what I want to do is look at a church in the book, in the Bible that shows mission in action. Like, where do we get the idea? Again, we talked about Acts, right? Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth. So persecution happens in Jerusalem, and because of that, the church has to spread out. Acts 11:19. Now those who were scattered because of the persecution that arose over Stephen traveled as far as Phoenicia and Cyprus and Antioch, speaking the word to no one except Jews. But there were some of them, men of Cyprus and Cyrene, who on coming to Antioch spoke to the Hellenists also. So in other words, the Jewish converts to Christianity were only talking to Jews because that's who they felt comfortable with. It's like, I don't know how to share my faith with those Greeks, those Hellenists, And they were preaching the Lord Jesus to the Hellenists. And the hand of the Lord was with them, and a great number who believed turned to the Lord. The report of this came to the ears of the church in Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas to Antioch. So a church is breaking out in Antioch, and the established church in Jerusalem, even though there was a scattering, there was still sort of structure there, they send Barnabas to Antioch. Now, when he came and saw the grace of God, he was glad and he exhorted them. So now he's teaching them, empowering them to remain faithful to the Lord with steadfast purpose. For he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and of faith. So the Lord was on the move. And as great many people were added to the Lord. So Barnabas, he needed more help. And he went to Tarsus to look for Saul. And when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. And for a whole year, they met with the church and taught a great many people. And in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. Now in these days, prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch, and one of them, named Agabus, stood up and foretold by the Spirit that there would be a great famine over all the world. And this took place in the days of Claudius. So the disciples determined, every one according to his ability, to send relief to the brothers living in Judea. And they did so, sending it to the elders by the hand of Barnabas and Saul. What's significant about that last two verses? Yeah, they saw the need, but who saw the need? The new church. The established church in Jerusalem spreads out. A church plant springs up in Antioch. The people in Jerusalem recognize it. They say, we need to help support that work. They send like real teachers, men equipped, men full of the Holy Spirit to go teach and everything. And then now you have a relationship. And there's missionaries going back and forth. And the new church discovers that the church in Judea, which is where Jerusalem is, they need money. And so that church then sends money back to Jerusalem. It's awesome. Well, you read Acts 11, 12, 12 kind of takes a different story, and then 13, 14, and 15, and it's all about this church at Antioch. So Acts 13, 1-3. Now there were in the church at Antioch prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, a lifelong friend of Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. We learned about that in Acts 11. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them. Then after fasting and praying, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. So Barnabas and Saul went to Antioch as missionaries, and then they just camp there. They're just staying there. But the church is self-sufficient and sustaining with all the locals. So what do? Paul and Barnabas get sent off from the mission church. And this is the model you see in the New Testament. A church that missionaries go out, a church is established, they're empowered, local people then become the leaders, and those people then go off somewhere else. And now those people who were started because people were sent, now they send people. It's a beautiful thing, these chapters in Acts. And again, 14, 15 show the same thing. So, they're sending and receiving missionaries to start churches and support churches, discipleship and empowering for ministry, evangelism and outreach. They're sending money out even as they receive it. So the best thing we can do for missions is support churches in places, because that becomes the outpost for the gospel. If we're sending missionaries places that never get to establish churches, then we're not providing that area with the means by which for the gospel to spread. You see? And so pre-evangelism is needed. In countries that have no gospel, you're not going to go there and start a church. You got to do pre-evangelism, and you go there however you can go there. But what we're seeing now, some 50 years and 60 and 70 years later, is a lot of places have churches. But they're not deep churches. They're not developed theologically churches. They don't have often reformed commitments. The churches in Africa are often very much prosperity gospel because that's what they kind of imported over. And so what does mission work look there? Empowering and training local peoples to do the work and be self-sustaining churches. See? And so this is some of what we talked about. So a 21st century model should focus on church planting and church plant support, because that's how those communities are going to get the gospel. Raise up indigenous leadership and support them. Rather than it being an American pastor pastoring a church somewhere for 20 years, we should be empowering local peoples to do that, and we support them. And then they contextualize the gospel into their culture and community. Shorter and more flexible commitments. So that way we're not supporting the same, we're not 20 years from now having to support the same cause. Now this doesn't say that we can't do that. We are doing that, and we're going to continue to do that because we want to continue to have relationships with the missionaries that we have. But we need flexibility to fund ministries, and then when those ministries are self-sustaining, take that money and fund another one. You get it? And then you're multiplying your efforts. View local outreach as missions. So view what we do here as missions and include that in our missions plan. And then train people to do evangelism and live on mission. We want to see conversions locally. Okay, so practical changes that the missions revitalization team did in 2021 and rolled out to the team. We put all missionaries on what we called renewable terms. So we said we want all missionaries on a term, because whenever we needed to talk about not funding a missionary anymore, it was viewed as a cut. How can we cut them? And we said, well, we always said all commitments were annual. But as soon as you decide you're not going to fund a missionary anymore, it's viewed as like you're firing them. And so what we said is, no, in order to have the flexibility that we think we need to be able to move where the Lord is moving us each year, we're going to put them on terms, anywhere from 1 to 3 years that we can renew. But that way, every year they know we're supporting you for 3 years, we're supporting you for 2 years. Next year, you're up for renewal. If you'd like us to continue to support you, please fill out this application again, and we want to hear the work you're doing, and we'll talk about it. That was very difficult for a number of people. Not the missionary, maybe it was for the missionaries, but members of the missions team, because they felt like that was a betrayal of these people. And at the same time, we were having to make cuts anyway because we didn't have the same funding. We worked on the policies for how to keep up with the missionaries. Some years we didn't hear back from any missionaries. We didn't know what they were doing. Some years we didn't even send letters out to the missionaries. And what we wanted to do is we wanted every year to send them a letter to know how much we're giving them next year and when we view their term to be up with us. We updated the scoring grid to ensure that missionaries, that we're supporting missionaries that fit with our vision. I'll talk to you about the scoring grid in a second. Local mission is considered mission. Now, mercy is not. We're still going to view that as separate. So funding the food pantry, we're not going to do out of Faith Promise money. That's coming out of a mercy budget, okay? But if there's a church plant locally or we do a local outreach, we could spend money on that local outreach to spread the gospel locally. That was hard for some members of the missions team to understand too. They said, I don't understand, that's local. Yet we're spreading the gospel. We also wanted to enter the year with more uncommitted money included in the budget. In other words, we wanted to plan, I think the number ended up being like $12,000. We wanted to have $12,000 not committed going into 2023. So that during 2023, the team can evaluate and see where there are immediate needs and make decisions because there's money there. And so we did that. Okay, we did. Okay. And then this turned out to be a mistake, but we didn't realize it at the time. We included outreach into the missions team. What we noticed was a number of people on the missions team were the ones that were planning all the outreaches. Got a Mission and Jamaica Drive outreaches and all these things. And the missions team is deciding where to send money for missionaries, but it's the same people. So we said, well, why don't you guys do it all? And it was just too much. So every meeting became about doing an outreach, and the missionary work for the Faith Promise team wasn't getting done. Last year, letters didn't even go out. Okay. So I already kind of said this. I don't want to go waste more time on that right now. Future vision and direction. So what else? So missionaries, these are some of the substantial things we did. Missionaries have renewable terms from 1 to 3 years, and they can be renewed, and they can just keep getting renewed. Like as far as I know, not as far as I know, I mean, we're not looking to stop funding Jeremy Sink. Okay, we love what he's doing and all that. Larger amount of uncommitted money each year, I've already said. Oh, we want to fund each year a one-time indigenous international project. So what is that? Well, you might remember the seniors had a speaker here a year or two ago, talked about, I forget what it was called, but it was like projects. So needs around the world, like this tribal communities church needs a portable, sound system. They need $700 for that. Or this church needs a new roof on where they're meeting, and that might cost $2,000. Like, it's a one-time investment that gives a church or a people something they need across the world. You do it, you know you did it, and you move on. Next year you do another one. You see, so you're seeing results, and you're helping local peoples do the ministry in their areas, because we still have the resources and they don't. We already said that. We said about the scoring grid. And we wanted to move the allocation, which was probably 80% international, to more equally national, local, national, and international. Okay, the scoring grid. There's a grid. This isn't the grid, but basically it assesses these areas. Are the missionaries coming from Meadowview or the presbytery? They're given preference. So for instance, if we had a young person that grows up and you train them and you die to have missionaries in the church, like Palmer Arms, and then they want to go on the missions field, we're going to give that person a priority because we're raising up a leader. Also from the presbytery. Through missions agencies that we respect, particularly Reformed ones, so MTW, MNA, RUF, and Surge. Mission to the World, Mission North America, Reform University, Fellowship, and Surge. These are PCA. The first three are PCA run. Surge is PCA related. We want theology from the PCA or Reformed, and that's given priority. So we're not going to not fund somebody necessarily if they're not Reformed, but that's where we're moving toward, and that's the priority. And then the type of ministry they're doing. So A, B, and C is kind of the ranking. We want to support more people in the A category. And even those, there's different scoring, but I just grouped them together. Evangelism, discipleship, and church planting are where we want most of our money to go. But mercy, medical, teaching, consulting work, that can also be supported. And then sort of the last group there, Bible translation support staff, so that's given a lower priority. Now, why the scoring grid had to be redone was because from 10 years ago or however long ago, Bible translation was given a higher ranking, and missionaries to the Islamic world were given a higher ranking. There's nothing wrong with that. But then as we reevaluate where the Lord has us today, we make new priorities, you see? And so the elders said, well, yeah, we understand the Arab world is a difficult place, but we don't want to, we don't have unlimited funds, and so we don't want to say that that's more of a priority than something else. And in Bible translation, I know that was really on your former pastor's heart, so that I think got a higher thing, and we got to get the word in people's hands. All right, so that's the scoring grid. These are we'll do this first. So here's the missionaries we're supporting this year. It's on the banners out there. Some of the newer ones are on the right there. Darren Stone, which is like I love the ministry Darren does because it's local, even though it's Raleigh, but we care about this country, we care about politics. If we don't pray for this country, somebody's going to tell us every Sunday, you didn't pray for the country. And so we actually have a pastor in Raleigh doing that work. Great Commission Church on the bottom there is Pastor Yin, that 7-foot guy I had talk at the Friday night part of the missions conference, the Sudanese pastor, who's just on fire for the Lord. So we added him this year. So he has a church of Sudanese Christians in Greensboro, but all their kids now are, so he's a Reformed pastor in PCA, are learning the gospel, and they're Americans. And then he wants to go back to Sudan and plant churches. So that's awesome. And then you see on there, Jeremy and Gina Sink, they're going to be, Jeremy will preach the last Sunday of October here, October 29th or something. We look forward to that. And so you see our missionaries. It's great list. Okay, these are the local outreaches and mercy ministry support that we do through the general fund budget, not through your faith promise dollars, but I do want to show like where that money is. And again, the session kind of took that back over from the missions committee because we said we want to be able to direct strategically who we're supporting in the community. All right. So I want to talk about this model for a second because this is just so neat. We're almost done. So the Malawi Reformation Network is actually, Richard Jones is on the board there. Jason Halopoulos is on the board. Malawi Reformation Network is seeking to plant Reformed churches in the country of Malawi. And the model that they're using is awesome. What they do is they bring local men over who have a heart for the Lord to the United States, and they train them. They receive their Master of Divinity from Puritan Reformed Theological Seminary. It's completely funded for them, and then they go to church and they do an internship at University Reformed Church, which is Jason Halopoulos' church. Okay? So we're getting people from a country to come over, be trained in Reformed doctrine, intern under Reformed pastors, but these are local men from Malawi, and then send them back and fund them for 4 years, and then you got a church in Malawi. Now, how much do you think that costs? It's on the bottom of the sheet there. Training in the USA for 2 years is $47,000. The Malawi church plant for 4 years costs $96,000. So for $143,000, you got a new church in Malawi, and then you start over. See, it's a model for sustainability because in 4 years they're self-sufficient. You don't have to fund them anymore. Who could imagine you could run a church for 4 years on $96,000? That's how inexpensive things are over there. And it's multiplying churches. And that's what Pastor Yin wants to do in the Sudan. Remember, he said, what did he say? He wants to train up 200 pastors in 5 years. 5 years from this, something like that. Okay, so as we wrap up, the transitions that happened this year. So as I said, we found out it was a mistake to make the Faith Promise missions team also be the outreach team, not because of them, but because it was they couldn't do it all. And so we split the missions team from the outreach team, and that idea, it's been met with mixed results from the team, but the idea came from the team. That's what people don't really understand. That wasn't a session idea. A few people from the team came to us, and we had been witnessing the struggle of not getting done a lot of what we needed to get done, but then the meetings going very long because we're dealing with outreaches. Okay, we're going to split into two groups, a missions team and an outreach team. Okay. And then, why does it say missions team and faith promise team? This is one team. It shouldn't say, it's the missions team is the faith promise team. But Aubrey stepped down as the interim chair. Now, when she took this over from Dan Entwistle, she never let us call her the chair. Like I have the emails. I want to be the interim chair. I don't want to do this forever. And she did it for a year and a half. I think that's how it worked. And then last year she told us, look, I need to focus on homeschooling my kids, and we're very busy. I don't want to be the chair. But we couldn't replace her with a chair. And so then we thought we'd get her administrative help. We asked a number of people in the congregation we thought would be gifted at that, and they didn't want to be on the missions team. The Lord wasn't calling them to it. And so she would have kept doing it. We finally said, you could step down. We'll work it out. So where we are currently with it is the outreach team has been disbanded as a team. And this might be why people say the missions team was dissolved. The mission team was not dissolved, but the outreach team was. Because what the session determined after a number of months was that it doesn't need to be a team. That if people want to do outreach, all they got to do is present a plan to Pablo, the session will approve it, and then we'll rally behind it. And so that's the way God a Mission started. By including that into the missions team, it caused confusion, and it's just not now. So Mike Manis does Jamaica Drive outreaches and Baptist Children's Home outreaches, and he can do that, and we're going to promote that. And the Vissers do God a Mission. The Vissers have also planned some of our missions trips, and they can do that. We don't need a team for that. But the missions team itself, when Aubrey stepped down and seeing the resources that we had on the team, and seeing also that the revitalization work that we've done and the new policies we've put in place, the team has had a difficult time in implementing those. The session has decided that the session is going to run that team for the next 2 years. Now, it's made up of Danny Snyder, Ozzie Marin, and Pablo Ayan, which were also on the missions team. And that's why I'm saying it wasn't dissolved. Aubrey stepped off, a number of people stepped off, and so we just said, let's us run it, let's us try to get a handle on all the issues and administrative details that are causing the team frustration, and we'll hand it back off within the congregation with session representation after we've done this for 2 cycles. So that's the plan there. That does not mean that Meadowview members are not involved. Because, for instance, Alice Snyder is still involved. She's still sending letters out to the missionaries. Aubrey Moore still has relationships with missionaries, as do the Vissers, as do the Manises. And what we want to do is expand that adopt a missionary mindset so that congregation is keeping in touch with the missionaries, and then through those people that are keeping in touch with them, hopefully we can share that information from the pulpit. Even the congregant can share it. And so that's the idea there. So the big question is, this is where the confusion was, who do I talk to about ... If you want to plan an outreach, you go to Pablo. He'll clear it with the session. I don't know, Mike, how many outreaches do you plan a year? Yeah, Jamaica Drive, Children's Baptist Home, 6 or 8. Do you have any problem getting approval for them? Okay. You know what Mike has a problem getting, though, is help. And that's where we want to help promote for you to do those kinds of things. The Vissers were doing God a Mission before there was a team ever anyway. So if you want to plan an outreach, Pablo is the funnel for that. The missions conference, Pablo is the funnel for that also, but he's not doing everything in the conference. He's just coordinating, things like the food with Sherry, things like the silent auction with Andrea Stowe, the luncheon with Danny Snyder, I think. So for the missions conference, you go to Pablo. By the way, you see the theme here? For short-term mission trip, where do you go? Pablo. But what I want to say is Pablo's not doing all that. Pablo is your first point of contact. Because I heard this over the last couple weeks. Well, we didn't know who to go to. And I'd say, well, am I that unreachable? But what about Pablo? Is he that, why? It's like you're making a thing out of something that's not a thing. Go to Pablo if you have a question. But that is the system. That's not lack of a system. The system is Pablo's overseeing congregational life, and he will help with those questions, and he will help get the information to the session. Okay? Now, missionary support goes to the missions team. So if you have a question about a missionary, or you have a missions application somebody gave you, you can give it to one of the 4 of us, Danny, Ozzie, Pablo, or myself. Okay. So hopefully that adds a little insight and clarity and tells you where we want to go. Maybe not. Do you have questions? What's that? Everything goes to Pablo. You notice he left. No, what we want to do is empower people to do these things. And that's why I asked Mike to speak up. He does 7 outreaches. We don't run them for him. He just tells us, hey, I want to do this. Is this weekend work? Can you let me promote it? I've had you come up and make announcements, haven't I? And that's what we want to do. We empower the visitors to do God a mission. When we want to do a missions trip, somebody's going to have to lead that. We want to empower that person to do that. But things have to be coming to the session. No questions, no thoughts?
George, thanks for the whole explanation, because I thought I was in the know, but I wasn't. Now I am, so thank you for doing this. It's extremely helpful. I wish we had that kind of guidance years ago that we kept asking for the team, particularly the focus areas. Translation was at the top, church planning was in the middle somewhere, and you just reversed it.
Yeah.
So that's where we get personally, sometimes we had some difficulty with that. I was in the church planning side, not as much on the translation side. So if we had clarity about that, I think that would have helped a lot. The only other kind of suggestion I might voice is, I'm not sure our congregation knows our missionaries particularly well. And I don't know if that's part of the reason why faith promise may be down a little bit, because they really don't know these people, except for missions conference, the folks that come. Years ago, every Sunday we'd have feature one of them up on the screen. I don't know if that was helpful or not. Marie just said it was.
I think so. I think that's a...
Just visibility, I'm not sure it's there for the congregation.
Yeah. I agree with you. And that's why I said, I think really early on, I said, I'll take that on me. Like I'm happy to help promote that. And I think if people here in this room want to keep up with a missionary, you have the prayer guides. I don't know if the emails are in there or not, but we can get you the information. And then, and this might scare somebody, but like you guys can come up and present your conversation with them, and we'll have a slide with them about it. But even if you don't want to present, if you're keeping up with them, at least we know somebody here is getting information of what they're doing, providing them with support. Sometimes they'll tell somebody who's keeping up with them, hey, we need some more money for this reason, or we're having this medical crisis, and we don't know that. If we know that, we might be able to help. Like there's one individual, I forgot his name now, but he's going through cancer, and so we're actually giving him, he's the gentleman in Florida, Jeremy Ross, right? And so we're going to give him a little bit extra money to help him, so yeah. And thanks for chiming in about that. And I do want to say, like, I think the priority 10 years ago or however long ago was that Bible translation was higher than church planning. So I'm not saying that we're not saying that was a wrong vision or that the missions team handled that wrong. We're just saying in asking for the session's vision, as the session thought and prayed through this, we said these are the newer priorities. Yeah. But thanks for explaining some of that, like validating some of the confusion and the fact that you guys were asking for help and maybe not getting it or guidance or whatever. It's a lot of work what you all do, the missions team. It's a lot. So, yeah.
What is the MTW's relationship with the local churches in working with missions?
MTW... Yeah, they're mostly what John said, a sending agency. They have less connection to the local church. MNA has more local church work because they're trying to plant churches in local areas. But like if we have questions, MTW can help us with those. And also like when disasters happen around the world, like Ukraine or something, and people want to be able to help with Ukraine or help with the Hawaii fires, how do you know who you're giving to and if it's a valid thing? MTW usually gets their missionaries on the ground to coordinate that. And so that's one way MTW helps us. But other than that, I don't know.
The good thing about the sending agencies is they do a lot of really important state work. I call it the news missionary going to the field, how to be a missionary, all the nuts and bolts about being out there. And they try to really support them in every way once they're in the field, and that's exceedingly important.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why we want to give more money through agencies we know, because and you remember, there are some missionaries who go with agencies that don't offer any support or accountability. So there's no way to know how are these missionaries being supported and are they doing work that they're supposed to be doing. Okay. If you have more questions, feel free to ask. If people say things like the missions team was dissolved, just say, no, there's a missions team. Go talk to Danny, Ozzy, George, or Pablo. It's not dissolved. 3 of the 4 members were previously on the missions team. But it is changed because the session is they have taken control of it. We have taken control of it for the next 2 years to get it running again since John left us in a lurch 3 years ago. 5 years ago. Yeah, since John aged out. And then if anybody has questions, let them watch this video. I'm going to pray. I know this has been